So it's really simple. So we want to make it incredibly easy for businesses to understand and reduce their climate impact. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but what we found was that there's three main areas where companies are struggling because those large companies need to understand, if I'm buying $1 million worth of consulting, what's the climate impact of that? I need to start accounting for that. All of a sudden, it's no longer just about price and quality, it's about price, quality, and sustainability of your product. Businesses are going to have to be prepared, but a lot of them don't even know that this is something that's coming down the pipe. So we're trying to put the word out about that.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Beyond Product podcast. My name is Moshe Mikanovsky and I'm your host. Today on the show, we're going to explore digital innovation in green tech. Our guest today is Sanders Lazier. Sanders is a CEO and co-founder of Carbonhound, building a platform that simplifies carbon management to make it easy and affordable for businesses to take climate action. Carbonhound automates high credibility climate reporting by integrating with thousands of primary data sources to unlock opportunities for clients in a landscape of changing regulatory and stakeholders' expectations. Sanders has scaled before multiple businesses across prop tech, fintech, and now green tech in both Canada and the UK. Welcome to the show, Sanders.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. It's exciting to see you. And I see that you are actually in Toronto. If I'm not wrong, this is the old City Hall behind you, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of a giveaway, but it's a beautiful part of the office. So thought I
Well,
would share.
for people that don't know Toronto, they might know only the shape of the new building, which is also the logo of the city and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But this is the building right next door, which is the old City Hall. And these days, I believe it is used as a courthouse, right?
Yeah, it's somewhere I don't want to end up.
Yes, absolutely. But it's a beautiful building. So if you just go to tour it, that's fine. So,
Yeah. I'll
but
tour the outside, not the inside. Yeah.
exactly. But today we're not here to speak about that. We're here to speak about you and about Carbonhound. So, Carbonhound is a great name. And I saw on your website that you have a mascot in the shape that he is a dog. And there is a lot of those pets on your about page. Is that is there anything there related to pets and our beloved friends, or it just happened to be?
Honestly, I was trying to figure out a name for the business, and I knew I wanted one thing, which is I knew I didn't want it to be boring because I was looking around at a lot of other businesses that were in this space, and
Hmm.
frankly, there's nothing memorable or even related to what they were doing. I remember one, and I'm sure they're a great company, but their name's CO2 Analytics, and I was thinking to myself, God, I don't think I'll ever remember that. I
Yes.
guess I did, but I really wanted something that evoked exactly what we do. And
Hmm.
when I say Carbon Hound to somebody, I almost don't even need to explain what we do. And I think that was the real benefit around it. And the second piece was I was really trying to figure out a way that we could make something memorable, and dogs are pretty memorable. So even if someone said, oh yeah, it's the carbon company that has dogs, right? So even if they remember it that way, I'm totally fine
Yeah.
with it.
Good call. Good call
Because
with that.
at least they
Yeah.
remembered us. Yeah. And
Absolutely.
just in case you're wondering, that's Gus. So Gus is the name of our cartoon dog on our site. And yeah, he has all sorts of different outfits that, depending on what you're doing in the platform, you might see.
Very interesting. We might get into that later. But you're right. I mean, that is a memorable name, and I gave the spiel in the beginning introducing you, but I wanted to hear
Yeah.
it from your own words. What is Carbon Hound, and what are you hounding there? What are you looking for exactly?
So it's really simple. So we want to make it incredibly easy for businesses to understand and reduce their climate impact. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. But what we found was that there's three main areas where companies were struggling. So one was expertise. So we've made the platform incredibly easy to use. The second one was capital. So you can buy it for $50 a month starting at. And the third one was data. So trying to
Mm.
understand how to automate data. So what we do is we look at all of the different places where your business is creating environmental impact, and we try to automate the data for those different sources so
Hmm.
that you can spend a lot more time thinking about how to make climate impact rather than working about, calculating the impact itself. We
Okay.
want to be that scoreboard. So that's a lot easier for companies to know whether or not they're doing the right thing.
Okay, so that is actually a really important thing these days. There are some regulations already in some areas of the world about carbon reporting or reporting what is your footprint.
Yeah.
So the solution there is helping with that requirement.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what we're seeing is that not only is the regulated space is huge in the EU, so there's a lot of regulation there, and small but growing in North America. In fact, 2 weeks ago, there's a new regulation that came into place in California that's
Mm.
going to impact any large business that does sales in California. So it's not just
Hmm.
covering California, but anybody who does business in California.
Hmm.
And so there's a huge market then of thinking about, okay, it's not only about these regulated entities, which are of course important and really act as the whistleblowers to get climate reporting moving, but it's also about their value in supply chains because there's companies of all sizes that live in those supply chains that are going to be subject to reporting as a result of these regulations because those large companies need to understand, if I'm buying $1 million worth of consulting from Root Quotient, what's the climate impact of that? I need to start accounting for that when doing my own reporting. And so all of a sudden, you create this voluntold market of all these businesses that aren't directly regulated, but because they want to maintain and grow relationships with larger businesses that are regulated, all of a sudden it's no longer just about price and quality, especially in the manufacturing space. It's about price, quality, and sustainability of your product. So as they're looking to differentiate, especially in markets where it's more commoditized, it's really cool because we get to provide differentiation for businesses that have maybe struggled to differentiate.
It's kind of almost like a parallel to how in security, like information security, it's not just about securing like a bank. It's not just about securing their own thing, but it's also about securing all of their vendors and supply chain and make sure
Yeah,
that the entire supply chain is secured. So in the same manner for carbon reporting or carbon zero footprint reporting, it's not enough just for the organization, the enterprises, the big companies to do it, but for everyone that want to work with them. So that's really
yeah.
where you're getting in, I believe, right?
Yeah, it's a perfect example, right? We have to do our SOC too because we want to work with larger companies. So
Mm.
it's precisely the same thing. We're just earlier in that cycle as we think about what I call trickle down carbonomics, right? So as we think about this trickle down effect of this regulation, businesses are going to have to be prepared, but a lot of them don't even know that this is something that's coming down the pipe. So
Uh,
we're trying to put the word out about that.
so take us through maybe the process. Let's say I'm a provider, maybe second tier to one of the automotive industry, maybe Ford. So what is it that me as a supplier has to really go through? And then how does Carbon Hound help with that?
Yeah, well, I'll give an example. So one of our clients has a large client, GM, right? And they're requiring this of all their suppliers now. Same thing with Microsoft. Another client did that too.
Hmm.
And so what we basically do is there's two different ways they can onboard. So there's the self-onboarding, which is a kind of think of TurboTax meets QuickBooks. And that's really what the process looks like. So step-by-step wizard-driven process where you go through a guide effectively to help understand what your footprint is. Actually, that's something that Root Quotient originally helped us with at the beginning of our journey. But the other way we engage, which we're finding more and more common, is that there's actually a huge confidence gap that clients have. And what that means is that because the space is so new, and this is one of the challenges around building a product in this space, there's really no confidence on the client side that they can do it themselves.
Hmm.
So they feel like they need an expert to help guide them. And
Mm.
so what we've done now is we've got this concierge process that we've put our customers through with one of our climate experts. And in that process, we'll go through map their operations, and then give them a new lens to look at their data through, which is climate. And so
Okay.
it's basically going through stuff that you as a company would always know, right? Um, where are you located? How many offices do you have? How big are
Hmm.
those offices?
Hmm.
Do you have energy bills for those offices? Do you, if you're a manufacturer, like what kind of materials are you bringing in? Where's that material coming from?
Mm.
What about the logistics of getting materials to and from your facility, right? What kind of machines do you have? What kind of energy are they burning? So it's really looking for and going through that discovery process.
Mm.
And we help ensure that you're meeting those guidelines with our expertise. And then we'll configure and set up your account and then flow the data from your operational data sets into our platform so that that process is automated for you.
Okay, so first of all, you do this audit. So if I rephrase that, you kind of do an audit with them, so they understand from your expertise what are the things they have to look for that create emission, carbon emission,
Yeah.
and then you identify the data points in their systems that you can bring into your system to analyze the carbon emission footprint that they have. Is that
Yeah.
kind of summarizing
Exactly.
that? I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So there is, I'm sure, a lot of data points in there because many organizations are using a lot of different products. Do you have a
Yeah.
way to standardize that, or you have lots of integrations with the other systems, or how does that work?
Yeah, we've got thousands of integrations with other platforms, so
Wow.
that's a big part of it. But
Mm.
most importantly, is really trying to get the context around the data that's coming in. So
Mm.
there's because if we don't have that context, then we don't know how to apply the appropriate. It's called an emission factor. So an emission factor is basically the number that you multiply that usage information from. So for example, if I am using 100 kilowatt hours of energy, I need to multiply that by the emission factor of the grid that we're currently on, and then
Mhm.
that gives me, and that accounts for, does the Toronto grid have natural gas or electricity or nuclear? And that emission factor, you just multiply it by that 100 kilowatt hours, and that gives you
Okay.
the output. But the hard
Wow.
part's not doing the math. The hard part is figuring out the context to understand which is the appropriate emission factor and making sure that you've
I
got
see.
complete and comparable data.
I see. That's really interesting. Okay, so you got that information in. How does that give you the actual score of carbon emission? Is there like a standard score there, or is there something that you apply that is comparable with a benchmark, or how does that work? So really like closing the loop on that to the outcome that they're trying to get, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the first step is figuring out that usage data. So the usage data could be dollars spent in some cases. Ideally, it's the amount of fuel that's been burned, right? And then there's a standardized process that called the GHG protocol that dictates how that calculation works.
Hmm.
So we run it through that process, and then that gives you your emissions. And then it's really then the real question is, how do you leverage that to tell a story that creates value from that data, right?
Hmm.
Because it's great to be able to report, but what we're seeing is that most companies are looking at it and saying, okay, well, if we have to make this investment in reporting, then we might as well do some more work with this, right? So we had one client who said, okay, we have to do this, but you know, maybe we create ESG strategy for our team. Maybe we start engaging with our
Mm.
organization and try to create more employee-led initiatives and try to, make it a cultural touchstone for our business.
Mm. Or
So
mhm.
climate no longer just needs to be. It's not just about reporting and regulation. That's just the first step to unlock all sorts of other benefits, and that's really what we're
Right.
trying to drive with our clients.
I see. So the idea there is not just for the reporting purposes, but also to make a change in the organization to help them get to even a better place from where they are right now, so they can always improve.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah, because I think it's 2/3 of employees will choose a values-based organization over one that isn't, and climate is a big part of
Oh, okay. Yeah.
of being a values-based organization, right? So whether
Yeah.
you're looking at talent, I think it's estimated that there's going to be $130 trillion that's expected to be invested into ESG based organizations or
Hmm.
focused organizations by
Hmm.
2040. So, if you're looking for capital, if you're looking for talent, and if you're looking for customers as well, uh, something like 80% of the largest companies in the world are reporting on climate. And because of the jurisdictions they're in, they're going to have to reduce their climate impact as well.
Right.
So
Right.
it impacts, it's a truly multidimensional product and cross department problem where
Hmm.
everybody in the company needs to work together. And I think that's what makes it really exciting to work on this, is that
Yeah.
there's a lot of point solutions out there where you just, okay, great, let's make a list of the VPs of sales and call them. And then, we've got a thing that helps you book meetings a bit faster, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a more multidisciplinary strategic initiative that is a lot more complicated, which makes it more fun, but also way harder to build product for.
Right, right, exactly. No, that's pretty cool. You mentioned a few acronyms over there, like ESG, and I'm sure that most of people that will listen to this, watch us, will already know what ESG. But if they have not, let's just make clear what it is. So maybe just very, very briefly, I will let you explain that.
Yeah, it's environmental, social, and governance. So
Hmm.
basically, it's looking historically, if you're looking at a company, you would get their financials, right?
Hmm.
But that doesn't really tell the whole story. So ESG is meant to fill in the gaps of the et cetera of a business that isn't captured in the financials.
Yeah,
So environmental is, obviously clear, right? Like, what's the environmental impact of your business?
yeah.
I mean, that could be anything from looking at cleaning up the oil and gas industry or chemicals industry and trying to force some, from Putin's perspective. Now it's obviously more focused on climate reporting and climate impact. But traditionally, the G has been the most important, and that's the governance side, and just making sure that there's adequate governance within the organization and disclosing how they're doing that. Don't need to look
Yeah,
very far to see issues with governance and why that's important, whether it's
yeah.
Enron or BTX, et cetera. And then, yeah, looking at the social side. So what's the social aspect, the social impact of your organization that you're
Hmm.
having in your community? So
Right.
often you'll see a lot of charity arms, like, or philanthropic arms of businesses that are looking to make an impact on that side as well. Um, you can also have negative social impacts, right? So if you look at a
Absolutely.
Meta, for
Yeah,
example, they're getting sued right now in the US because
yeah.
it's seen as a negative impact on kids, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what's happening is that ESG, the challenge with ESG is it's so wide encompassing
Mm-hmm.
that there's also a lot of non-quantitative aspects to it.
Right.
And so you're hearing a lot about woke capitalism, is something you probably hear a lot about as well,
Mm.
especially in the US rhetoric. And that's where they're saying that, the social aspect has gone too far and companies are becoming not, their role is changing from being one of the company that has no opinions and is just flat on the ground if anything comes up and doesn't want to talk about anything,
Right.
to taking social stances and creating whole campaigns around purpose and diversity
Mm.
and, all
Mhm.
these, as I said, values-based business, right? Positioning themselves as a values-based business. And so
Yeah.
obviously in a world where social it can be very, like, social initiatives can be very polarized.
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
we, like, that's getting kickback from political organizations and from folks. So
Yeah.
the challenge that we're facing is that we wanted to say, hey, look, this is the quantified aspect. Let's take this out of ESG
And
and let's think about how we can solve this scientific problem that is real and is being measured,
mhm.
um, and focus on that. And so that's
Yeah.
why we're positioning it more as a climate solution and trying to pull out of the ESG world. But
And that's one of the things that I was always a bit kind of like, my knee reaction when I see ESG is that environmental is quite different from social and quite different from government. So why put all of these together? A lot of the stuff that we're doing, like you're doing in environmental related, is exactly what you're saying is trying to take that out of that to make it more quantifiable and more manageable for organization, that there is no really a lot of questions about it, where social is so much more different than that, so much more archaic sometimes. But let's go back maybe a bit to your background. How did you get to that? So we mentioned in the beginning that you build property tech and fintech. How did you get green tech and to build, as a co-founder, to build Carbonhound?
It's a good question. It's been a long and winding road. So honestly, I knew I wanted, so I've been my entire career. Um, I've looked at it as a path of talent, of skill acquisition, right? So how do I acquire skills on the commercial side, sales, marketing, then how do I acquire partnership, building how to build partnerships, how to build products, how to
Hmm.
design, how to work with developers. So my entire career was built with the goal of being an entrepreneur because that's
Hmm.
what my family does. My brothers, my dad, everyone's started businesses, right? So, um,
I'm kind of jealous of you because I was so much away from that with my family. So, build, growing up in a family like that is always helpful.
totally, it allows you to it allows you to feel like taking risks is okay and failing is okay, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but fundamentally, I was building towards starting my own company, and then the pandemic hit. I quit my job, moved back to Canada, and I was thinking about what I wanted to work on. And one image just kept coming into my head, which was when my son is reading about the climate crisis in 20 years or 15 years in a textbook,
yeah,
and he looks back at me and asks what I did.
yeah.
I wanted to have a damn good answer. And so that's what got me into sustainability. Because when I looked further into it, I got really frustrated and frankly angry because there's a lot of three-letter acronyms. There's a whole alphabet soup of initiatives that were that you need to know apparently in order to be effective in the space.
Yeah.
And I just felt like there's a lot of language that was getting created that was doing the opposite of what I thought needed to happen, which was we have to democratize access to climate knowledge.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
we need to make it simple and easy for people to understand and reduce their impact because the hardest step is always the first one.
Yes, yes.
And so
Hmm.
that's where this all came from. I tried to start a real estate business that was focused on sustainability and then realized there was too many barriers to do that. And I wanted to help solve that problem.
That's a great story. I love stories like that where our personal life, our kids are almost like putting this light in front of us, and
Mm.
they are the dearest for us, and we want to make their life better. So what is it not like? It's obvious that we should try to work on something that will make their world much better than what we have grown up in, we're giving them. So I love that. So you also mentioned about the risks that you saw with your family and how you were part of that entrepreneurial family. Tell us a
Yeah.
bit, from that experience of an entrepreneur. What does it means like to feel that risk and still take it, and to say yes, it is okay to fail as an entrepreneur, because that's the only way really to succeed. So tell me about that from your perspective.
Okay, I want to be really transparent here because I feel like this doesn't get talked about enough.
Hmm.
I was in a very lucky position where I had a family that I was coming from that, and I had a wife that made a good income. And so I was in a position where I could take a risk without a huge amount of downside.
Oh, believe me,
And
I have a wife that also have an income, and I don't take the risk even with that. So,
no, but
so
I,
it's
I
okay.
think
You
like
don't have to use it as something to say. Oh, because of that, I could take the risk. You're still taking a risk,
it's
right?
true, but I do honestly feel like there's this mythos. Whereas you look at all these companies are really successful companies, and they often start from a place where there is a little bit of privilege. And I just want to make sure that we recognize that because it's not as easy for everybody to start a business from scratch. And for some people, the risk is bigger. And for me, certainly it was a risk, but it was one that I was excited to take.
Right.
And so that I just want to talk about that. But in terms of, taking that risk and, having a baby and a new house all at the same time, I think that was the scariest thing for me was
Yeah,
looking at my expenses go like this
absolutely. Yeah.
and my income go like that. So that was certainly scary, but uh, I really felt like we've got an opportunity that's once in a lifetime. These regulations are only going to come in once, right? The problem has to be solved now. And so for me, it wasn't a question of whether it had to be done. It was more a question of how quickly.
I see. Okay. So when you went through that process, taking that risk, tell me a bit about the discovery of the product, the problem first, and then the product. And was it straightforward, or did you have to pivot throughout that? What did you find on the way?
Well, we're still working on it, right? I think anyone who anyone who isn't Series B plus is probably still figuring it out. So um, from my perspective, it all started with that process of trying to start that sustainable finance business, and then I had a list of 42 different suppliers for the climate side that were options, and none of them did what I wanted. So I think it's the classic story of trying to solve my own problem at the beginning.
Okay.
Um, and then from there, doing that research around, okay, who can I speak with? Starting with family, starting with friends, and just talking to anybody I could and getting an
Hmm.
understanding of where climate was on their agenda and what the challenges were that they were facing. And I was lucky. I ran into companies like Kingset, which is still a customer of ours, who they're building their entire company, not their entire company, but a huge part of the strategy is around building green buildings because they think that that's going to create a better outcome for their business. So
Okay. Yeah.
it's looking at those use cases and trying to figure out, okay, how do we build something that helps enable that? And how do we build something, because they hired an entire team to do this.
Uh-huh.
How do we take that and build something for 99% of companies who aren't going to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on climate talent? And so when we looked at that process, it was a lot of interviews. It was a lot of, frankly, like working. First thing, there's one piece of advice I could give. It's always hire a designer is the first thing you do, and work closely with them because they've got a tool set that really helps frame problems. And there's nothing better. You can do paper, of course, but there's nothing better than having rough prototypes that you can run people through and getting feedback on that. And just the way that designers structure the discovery sessions and the way that they go about problems really will accelerate any product journey. So that was something I prioritized very early. And then the second thing I did was get educated. So for myself, I went to school. So I took night classes at U of T on climate reporting, really activated my professor as a coach and champion for me to help validate what I was doing and build and start to build a network within the sustainability space. So,
That's great.
same thing with, choose, I think when you're choosing any stakeholder that you're working with as a founder,
Uh-huh.
you have to look at what they're bringing to the table, not just in terms of the skills, but also the network, right? So
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
could I could
Hmm.
have gone online and got incorporated through an online portal, but I decided I wanted to work with Osler, for example, because they were highly recommended by my network and they deal with a huge number of startups and investors in the space, right? So
Mm.
it's kind of looking for knots of speed in every decision that you make as a business in order to accelerate your path as a company, but also from a product perspective, right? You're as soon as you get into one company that's doing something in the space or one advocate in the space, you can often leverage that to three or four introductions and just build your network from there.
These are great tips for other founders on where to look for things, especially in areas that you're not really expert at. So you had to learn about sustainability, and you had to learn, I think, also about technology to actually build the product. and then find the right people that will open the doors for you for that network of people that already know how to do these things or in that area. Correct?
Yeah, and I think like don't be afraid to start a business in an area that you don't know, right? Because you've also there's all of this learned experience that I had from my other startups that I was able to take to this that I feel like I've made a better product. And so, I was looking through research papers and reading the down to the details and really questioning everything. And I think that's our superpower as generalists. And we shouldn't shy away from like don't be afraid of any problem because you can figure it out. Like unless
Yeah.
it's something deeply technical like a health tech startup or something
Yeah.
where that domain expertise is required. A lot of founders I know in the climate space in Toronto weren't in the climate space before 2 years ago. So take the chance and just bet on yourself and bet on your slope and your learning path.
Yeah. So you probably had to build something like an MVP, and I'm always interested from a product perspective, from product management, to learn from entrepreneurs because there is a lot of overlaps things there. How did you get into like building the first version, and what did you learn from that experience? And then is that the version you are already still using, or did you pivot it since then?
Yeah, well, I think when we were looking at it, initially I kind of took a top down approach, right? So I looked at the market and said, okay, we need to do, there's clearly two issues. So it was initial research gleaned some key insights around what were those initial barriers, right? So, I used SurveyMonkey. SurveyMonkey's got a really cool platform where you can actually select demographics and all sorts of other information.
Hmm.
So we did a bunch of quantitative research and got, I think 1,000 survey results from that. We went through, industry materials like the SME Climate Hub. And then eventually I found a resource specifically designed by one of the leading standards for small businesses. And so basically I said to myself, okay, well, let's just use this and turn this into an application because it was just a 25-page guide. Um, and so that was the starting point to say, okay, we're just going to follow the experts here and try to simplify the language and and then use myself and, my friends and family and other businesses that we came across as testers to see how we can really make this simple.
And that was a guide
And
to do what? To build what? To build a survey or to build a product?
to build a product, well, it wasn't really, it was a guide. So it was the 9 to 5 guide on how to calculate your emissions if you're an office-based business. So I basically
Oh,
took
okay.
I took
Mhm.
the smallest possible, simplest possible solution and customer set, and tried to break down the problem into its smallest kernel, and then build that, and then build on, and then we've been kind of building on top of that from there. So if we're looking at carbon footprinting in particular, office-based businesses have many fewer sources than, let's say, a manufacturer. I just looked for the simplest possible solution that had the largest, 60 plus percent of companies in Canada are professional services businesses, right? So I kind of looked at that Venn diagram of simplicity versus size of market, and
It's a
that's where we
niche, but it's
started.
still a big segment of businesses for sure. But that's a great way to start it with a small one that has less problems. There is no manufacturing, there is no logistics to move things around and stuff like that, right? It's just an office that they operate. Was that before COVID or after COVID? Because many people worked from home
Yeah, that was during COVID.
during
Yeah.
COVID.
Yeah.
So, okay. And then what happened?
So basically, we started building that out. And then, frankly, we ended up signing a customer, our first customer that had about 75, 80 businesses that they did carbon accounting for. And then we pivoted a little bit in terms of, okay, we've got a real client. They've got all these different use cases across dozens of industries that they've had to deal with. So we're going to work hand in glove and we're going to build and validate everything we do past them. So we spent about 6 months just building to what they had been doing for 15 years and working through their processes, their pains, their challenges, and trying to build a platform that really worked for them, whilst at the same time So what we would do is we would actually, every single feature that they would want, we would then scale it and like score it based on how do we feel like this will impact their clients? What's the impact? Is this something that other clients will use that aren't them?
Uh-huh.
And basically, what we would do is we'd try our best to align all of our development time on the things that would benefit them and all of our other clients that we want to bring onto the
Right,
platform.
right.
And then try to figure out other ways that take less coding and development time to address the specific, the unique needs of that particular organization. So it became a lot more iterative and working side by side with clients. And
Right.
that's been the big shift that we've had over the last year is it's a lot less build and hope and a lot more sell and then build.
Interesting. So, one of the risks of building for specific clients is that it's going to be very specific to their needs. But I do hear that you were, trying to make it more generic so you can also sell it to other clients, etc. And when you go with a niche market like that don't have a lot, extra complexity in there, it's probably easier to do that. Did you find throughout the process there that you have to shift your focus to other type of businesses, or is it still the same type?
Well, it's funny. Honestly, I don't think we had any. I think the biggest challenge that we found in this space is that, back to our example earlier, it's not a neat persona of VP of business or VP of business development. Create a list on Apollo or whatever your your data provider is, and we're going to get a very specific persona for that group because climate's so new. You could have two identical businesses next to each other that from the outside are exactly the same, but then in terms of their priorities from a climate perspective are vastly different. And so trying to, and not only that, at one company, it could be the compliance person doing it. Another company, it could be the health and safety person.
Yeah,
Another company could be the chief operating officer. At
there's
another
not
company, it
yet.
could be
Yeah,
the administrator, right? So,
there
or
is not yet
even
that
the
one
EI.
person that is nominated for that. So there isn't yet like a security compliance officer. There isn't a carbon compliance officer or something like that, right?
Exactly. Like we'll talk to people and they'll say, "Wait, there's compliance coming? I didn't even know about that."
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So, and I have no idea whose job it is. Right?
yeah.
So that was a really huge challenge for us. And so what we've realized is that we can't use traditional firmographics to decrypt our ideal customer profile. Even though it's a very small subsection of the market, we're just going to go after the regulated market. And so we did two things. One was we moved up our targeted customer profile from 1 to 500 to 1 to 2000. And the second thing we did was started to build out, look at what are the other factors and commonalities amongst all of our customers that we have. And are there any external indicators that we can use to try to find non-traditional markers of that interest in climate. So, maybe they're a B Corp, right? Maybe they're committed to net zero on Science-Based Targets Initiative, whatever it
Right,
might be, right?
right.
So it's looking for other indicators, and then the next thing is looking at, okay, where's the pressure coming from? Because the other thing we noticed was that there needs to be pressure from stakeholders for people to take action. So looking at where that stakeholder pressure was coming from and trying to map and discover those ecosystems that were feeling that pressure that would often be cross-functional, right? Or cross industry.
So you see these different forces in different organization about where is it coming from, as you mentioned, but it's also coming from externally, either from the regulations that are coming from some governments or from industries that are forcing on themselves these regulations because they know they need to do it. Because many times regulations are coming later in the game, only after the industry is actually already created their own regulations, right? That I've seen that happen.
Yeah, kind of. Like I would say that you've got industry associations that are trying their best to figure it out, but and there's a lot of talk. And I think that if you look at the climate space in particular, there's a lot of talk. And so the ones that are actually taking real steps and strides towards reporting and doing it with integrity and not just doing a calculation like using an online calculator and trying to claim net zero by buying some cheap offsets. Like there's a lot of people telling a story out there that's based on pretty flimsy foundations. And so what's changing is that the regulation is starting to force transparency around that, and it's that trickle down effect that's the quality of disclosures that's being required is going up because there's more severe penalties for not meeting them.
Right. So those forces are also coming from externally like that.
Mm-hmm.
So is it companies are maybe if you know and you can maybe order it by the what you are seeing in the market, what people are putting more importance on? Is it more about this outside enforcing regulations? Is it the relationship with their clients, so they have to make sure that they still can do business with them? Or is it their personal, the same as you, they want to make a better world for their kids, right? What do you see out there?
Um, the most depressing finding of the last 2 years is that the last category doesn't buy. So it doesn't matter if you're passionate about it personally, unless it just doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that helps as soon like people might be looking for the business need always comes first,
Mm.
and then and this is specific to high integrity carbon reporting because so a lot of people who might be passionate about are small business like small businesses who want to do the right thing. So maybe they're buying, trying to buy sustainable cotton for their shirts, or they're trying
Hmm.
to, or they're trying to do, I don't know, net zero shipping or something like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But off like 99% of the time in that small business space, those are the sorts of actions that are being taken. There's no accounting for the actual impact of the company. So it's more of a stories based approach and a qualitative based approach rather than a quantified based approach.
Hmm.
And so they don't actually, because as long as they can sell the story to their clients, they don't really seem to be that interested in doing the math on it.
Interesting. Interesting.
So
So
that's been the biggest learning from that perspective. So to
uh-huh.
answer your question, it's really the push is really the regulatory side and the customer pressure. And if you've got people who are passionate about it, then they're often the ones that are getting stuck with those projects to meet those requirements.
Yeah.
But the benefit of that is that they're quite passionate about doing it, right? And so when
So
you get that pressure, you've got people who you can activate to
yeah.
create change within the organization.
So it does help. The passion does help, but the bottom line is the bottom line. It's about doing business and being profitable.
Yeah, and I feel like the big shift that we're trying to make right now as an organization is how do we help take this data and help them tell a really compelling story and change the expectations that their stakeholders should have in terms of the quantification of the impact that they're having from a
Mhm.
climate perspective,
Right. Right.
and help tell people better, help people tell better stories with data. So
Yeah.
with recyclers, for instance, we're working on a piece of our product right now to help them quantify the avoided emissions of using recycled product um, uh, versus virgin product, right? And even helping them say, even compared to our peers in the industry, how does that compare? So tell that story with the data to help differentiate. And secondly, moving the other thing I think about a lot from a product perspective is, who is that buyer, right? How do we, we're getting put into, how do we get away from, I love operational people, I love compliance people. They're great and it's a great reason to get started, but there's often price pressure to on operations and operational budgets. The budgets often are set yearly, and so from a product perspective, I'm thinking about, okay, how do we build a product that we can sell to different personas, right? And how do we think about telling that marketing story through our product, so that we can sell more to marketing organizations within those and sales organizations within those businesses where there's a lot more discretionary budget and it's a lot bigger, which would then enable us to increase our deal size and increase the value that we're bringing to our clients, and start to make that real empirical argument that what's good for the climate is good for business. The other key problem that I think we're solving is addressing the climate knowledge gap. As you've seen, huge number of businesses have a need for this reporting. The number of practitioners isn't growing, and the amount of people with experience isn't changing, right? There's a lot of people entering the field, and there's a huge gap in terms of that mid-market, especially around climate knowledge and be able to execute on high credibility strategies. So if you look at climate tech as a proportion of overall funding over the last few years, it's only gone up.